This is the Brave Space podcast. We meet, we process, we heal in community. My name is Dr. Jordan, and I'm here with Norman. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Norman Kerr. I am the CEO of Trajectory Changing Solutions, TCS, and we work with nonprofits and municipalities really around the world, but definitely around the U.S.
Okay, nice. Well, thank you for joining me on the Brave Space couch. I know it's your first time, and we just started meeting. I think we met maybe less than a month ago.
Yes.
Is that right? Less than a month ago. So I brought us some warm-up questions, right?
Sounds good.
So it is a Brave Space. So I guess maybe a first question is, what does a Brave Space mean to you?
A brave space means a place where people aren't judged, where people feel like they can really be themselves. And I know those places are hard, to find and don't really exist in many places. But to get to that point where somebody feels that they can really be their authentic selves, I think is a brave space.
Okay, yeah, I like that answer. So non-judgmental, authenticity.
Yes.
I agree with those. Okay, so first question, what shows are you into these days? What are you watching?
Oh, man, I have such a diverse viewing. One show is definitely 90 Day Fiance.
Okay.
Caught you off guard?
Yes, definitely.
It's an interesting show, and there's just so many layers to it. Just like the cultural aspects of it, the communication aspect, how hard it is to communicate and things get lost in translation, and the pursuit of, being with someone, and you're not really sure their motivation.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So to the outside, it may appear one thing, and then for them, it may appear to be something different. So that's definitely a show that I watch. I watch a lot of sports as well.
Okay. 90 Day Fiance is interesting. I'm not going to let you scoot past that one too fast. And I guess I'll share too. So I probably should have said this first, but part of why it's a brave space is that I try to also be vulnerable and say stuff so it doesn't feel like I'm just asking you all the questions. So I'll share too. I started watching Pop the Balloon or Find Love. Have you?
Oh, I've watched clips of that.
Okay. I usually scroll past it because it's on YouTube. I usually scroll past it because I think it's kind of silly.
Right.
But it's also weirdly interesting. And I don't know if it's I'm looking at it from a clinical perspective. But I started watching Pop the Balloon or Find Love. And have you seen that one? You've seen just clips of it? I don't know what it is about that show, but I think for me, it's is this real? That's my first question.
Right.
Do the participants really believe that by going on this show, they will truly find love? I don't know. What do you think? You think it's real or?
No, I think I do think it's real. And I look at it from a clinical lens as well sometimes.
Okay.
I'm just intrigued by human behavior and people's reactions to things and how their response to how they're treated.
I think we kind of have that in common, looking at or just being an observer of human behavior. I think it's also important in the work that we do, which we'll get to at some point. So the second question I have, what makes you laugh versus what makes you cry?
I love comedy.
Okay.
I love to tell jokes. I love to see things that are funny. I mean, not at the expense of others. I don't like to see when people are, hurt in some way and people laugh at that. I don't really like that. But just really things that you don't expect to be funny. Those are the things that really I think are funny.
Okay. And you have a sense of humor?
Totally.
Okay. What, tell me about your comedy style, because I did not know you were funny. I thought you were low-key.
I mean, there's a place for everything. So, in work, I'm a little bit more serious, but
okay.
I love to laugh. And I'm the youngest of 6, so I was the mascot, if you will. I was the one in the family that was telling all the jokes and, the cute little kid running around, So I enjoy that.
Okay.
And just seeing people, have a long day and they come home and they're able to let loose a little bit and laugh. I mean, those are things that, really drove me.
Okay. So you said you're the youngest of 6. Where are you from? Tell me like a little bit about where you're from, how you grew up.
Yeah, so originally from Montego Bay, Jamaica,
Okay.
and moved to Chicago when we were young. So I went to school there, high school. Went to college as well in Illinois, and did my grad school work at University of Chicago in clinical social work. So growing up, I was an athlete. I played football. I wrestled. I played basketball. I just love sports and being active, and I love to, act in plays and stuff like that at church. And we were a church family, Seventh-day Adventist, so we went to church on Saturdays. So Friday night was our Sabbath, which I think saved me, because I was just not out on Friday nights. Like a lot of my friends who ended up in all kind of things. So. Very close-knit family, but church community was really big for us. And my parents really stressed, education and family.
Yeah, yeah. So what was life like for you growing up? So you played sports. It sounds like you were in some ways sheltered from your environment. Would that be fair to say? And if so, can you?
A bit. I had, like as I mentioned, I was the youngest of 6, so I had, 3 older brothers. So, so they were always like, watching me, and, so sheltered as far as, my parents being religious, they just didn't want us to be like, of the world,
For sure.
right? So they were very mindful about, what we were into, and we were very limited, to say the least. And as I got older, things loosened up because my parents were older parents, like typical Jamaican parents back in the day. My mom had me when she was, 44. So by the time I was in high school, my parents were, people thought they were my grandparents, so they were a little bit older. And my siblings say I got away with the most, because my parents were just too tired or, just kind of over it at that point. So,
yeah. Would you say that you had like an enjoyable upbringing, kind of like straight and narrow? Is that how you were?
Yeah, I mean, when I reflect on growing up, I was very fortunate. I had, 2 parents, a bunch of siblings. Because we migrated here, we really didn't have a lot of extended family, so no grandparents, no cousins that were like really close. But I did connect with, my park supervisor, people in my community, people in my church. So I lived in a community in Chicago, Rogers Park, where it wasn't known for violence. But things happened there. And if you know Chicago, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's strips in Rogers Park that were very challenging. And I grew up in that environment, so I lost a lot of friends naturally. And, I was able to navigate that, because of my older siblings and because of the friends that I connected with. But it always just kind of stayed with me, like, why were, some of my friends involved, or why did we lose them, to either getting incarcerated or getting killed, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I really started thinking about that later, because what was missing from their lives? Like, I don't know, because I didn't spend enough time with their families. I didn't know anything about their family structure, and at that time I wasn't paying attention to any of that. But all I knew was I had friends that were super charismatic, good-looking, smart, athletic, funny, and we were losing them to like dumb stuff.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me into the work that I do, because I'm like, there's got to be something else. We can't just keep losing people like that. And all my friends were black males, either from the Caribbean, grew up with a lot of Jamaicans, Haitians, Belizeans, but also Americans that, were from the west side and south side that had migrated to the north side. It just didn't make sense to me, so that motivated me to get involved in this work.
What age were you when you moved to Chicago?
6.
So you were young. Do you remember what age you were when you started realizing that you were losing some friends, or that things were?
It was teenage years.
Teenagers?
Teenage years, yes. Just late, 8th grade, freshman, sophomore year. It I couldn't make sense of it, you know. And later on, it really got me. It really hit me in my later years. It's like, man, just a loss, right? And I just started thinking about their families. At the time when something happened where they got killed or whatever. I didn't know how to connect with the family. Like, it just didn't make sense. But as I got older, I wanted to go back and like connect with those family members.
Yeah. Was there one friend or one situation in particular that just really stood out to you or that has always stuck with you over the years?
Yeah, there was a guy, Mark, that, we went to school together. We worked together. Actually, we were working at a grocery store together, over the summer, right before I went to college. And he was involved in the streets, which I didn't care about that. Like, I'm not judging anybody. Like, a lot of my friends are involved in the streets. But he was doing well. I mean, he had a legit job and he was doing some things, but that loss really hit me because I really cared about him, and he had all the things, charismatic, funny, all these things. And like, people just don't care about that stuff. Like, there's no love there. And that's the thing that really hit me. There was no love there. It's like, okay, well, he's just another dude. So like, nobody's getting to know somebody and saying, damn, this person doesn't deserve this, doesn't deserve to die. Like, nobody cares about that.
Did it feel like people were just moving on too quickly?
Oh, absolutely. People move on. And that's the thing. It's like, I think about, my last days. Like, people are going to move on, No matter what I do, no matter what kind of impact I leave, people are going to move on. It's like, for some, it's like I was never here.
Yeah. I imagine, too, that probably shaped, in some ways or maybe in many ways, the work that you do today, losing people. Do you remember what age you were when maybe you started making the decision, like, I want to help, I want to reach out, I want to support people who are dying? And was it due to gun violence, Mark?
Yes. So I started coaching basketball at my church. We started a basketball league, for adults and for youth. And I played on the adult team, but I also coached the young people. And that was a point where I was like, man, just being involved in their lives, you can actually influence them, and you can have an impact. And I started thinking about my park supervisor growing up, this guy, Jim Hobson, who's, he was just saw him earlier in the week. He was just tireless, the way he poured into us, right? And I just started making that connection that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be pouring into people to help them, stay on a certain path or not, go down a certain road.
Which is a really selfless decision, right?
And I think some of it is just my parents were just, involved in church. I mean, we gave a lot of our time. We went to nursing homes. We all did all these things. My parents sang a lot, for people to help comfort them, So I think it was just something that was just instilled in me, from when I was young, that I didn't pay attention to until, I got to that point where it made sense.
What point was that it made sense for you to start getting into the work of reducing gun violence?
Well, the point of realizing that people would listen to me.
Okay.
Okay. And that there's things that I can do to help, address it. So when I came out of undergrad, I was a political science major. Okay. And political science just sounded cool to me. It's like, I thought about being a politician, but it wasn't something that was very practical at the time. So I started working with young people after I graduated, and it was one of the best feelings. We would we work on prevention skills, basically helping them to refuse, drugs and gangs and guns and so forth. And, it was just really rewarding because the young people were really getting into it, and you could tell that if they were getting these types of touches, that it would influence them, so that was a point in my life where I realized, man, like I can make a difference with some young people. And over the years, it just got deeper and deeper into not just prevention, but more into intervention and working with, street organizations and individuals that, were most likely to shoot or be shot, so getting involved with more of the highest risk.
Yeah.
And, contrary to what people think, these guys can change.
Yes.
And these guys want to change, right? That's been an argument that we've been doing for 30 years. So we know that people can change. We know that they want to change. We just have to make sure that the environment is conducive. So they're going to be supported. We're not going to shame them in any way for their past behaviors. We're going to love them unconditionally, and we're going to pour into them. So as I just kind of been working over the years, I've just been really strengthening that side of myself, to be able to do that better.
Yeah. Pouring into people is not easy, especially when you're waiting for the change to happen, right? Because it could take a long time.
Absolutely.
It requires a lot of patience. And then sometimes, I know this has been at least part of my experience, sometimes you can feel helpless even. It's like you might be looking at a young person and I can see so much potential in you if you just do this or if you just like make these decisions. So where's the tension for you? Where is the tension lie? Like, I want to help, but it feels difficult. Like, where's the tension for you?
I mean, all of that, what that you're saying is really the tension. It's like, I mean, I've really trained myself to be patient, because people aren't going to move at the speed that we want them to.
Right.
And I think about like my mother, just some things that my mother would say to me, and I'd just be like blowing it off, right? And then as an adult, and I had daughters, like I sounded like my mother, right? Like it made so much sense. It clicked, right? And sometimes it takes time for us to get it, and I've seen that work with participants that I've worked with over the years as well. It's like, man, so much potential, as you mentioned. You're just like, man, if they only did this.
Yeah.
And they can't see it because we have to let them do it. It's like we can listen to them and we can help point out some of the things that they're even saying. But at the end of the day, like they're going to have to be the ones that actually do it. And we have to allow for that, at their speed. And we can't just preach. I'm really big on we have to listen, But I've seen that with participants who come back later to me years later and say, this is what you did for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that it penetrated at all. And I didn't think they got it. And it made sense to them, you know?
Yeah. I think one of the things we underestimate is that people we're talking to, they're actually listening to us.
Yes.
But even more than listening to us, they're watching us.
Yes.
Right. So they're watching how we move. They're watching I heard, I think it was Dante say, my nights match up with my days. Right. Like they want to hear us, but they also, I think, even more want to know that what we're telling them, we're actually walking out. So how, has that been a challenge for you in any way? Or maybe in your younger years coming into this work, is it hard to walk the straight and narrow when you know you have people who are looking up to you?
It wasn't hard for me, or it hasn't been hard. I mean, as I mentioned, I grew up really religious, so I wasn't, smoking weed or anything at that time, or, any kind of crazy drinking or anything like that, so I would say I was a good model, right? Okay. But I mean, whether you're a model or not, we have to be able to be there. And that's the thing. And I think that's what allowed me to connect with folks, is that, they could identify that, man, you didn't grow up the way I did, right? And I didn't try to say that I did, but it was the consistency of me being available to them and being somebody who would just listen and not scold them.
Yeah.
And that's going to win out. you know, regardless. You know, somebody who is just, who you can just, you know, say whatever you want to, and it's like they're not gonna like clap back and say something, you know, to make you feel like, you know, you were wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we provide counsel, but the judgment and the way we talk to people is the thing that most people don't know how to do. And that's how we lose young people, especially.
For sure.
Is that adults seem very judgmental. They're, you know, they're adultists, you know, and young people sense that. And most young people won't talk to adults who come off that way.
For sure. Why would they?
Very little. They'll share very little, and adults are wondering, why won't they talk to me? You know, it's like, yeah, you have to change your approach.
For sure. Do more listening, like you mentioned. More listening.
And more empathy.
More empathy. Yeah. Why is empathy important? I know why it's important, but why? Like, I want to hear it from you.
Well, I mean, you know, even in my church growing up, it's like I had adults in our church who weren't very empathetic, and, you know, they were very judgmental. But people forget that they were going through challenges as well.
Yeah.
And when you think about just like, you know, adults to young people, it's like the empathy is there. It's like you didn't have to go through exactly the same thing, but you know that you were treated a certain way because you were younger, you know. And if we could even get in that mindset, independent of like the exact things that people are doing, then I think we would have better relationships with, you know, our young people.
Yeah. Do you feel like maybe, I don't know, like some young guys or young men that they would resist your counsel if you didn't have their lived experience? So you mentioned like not smoking, not really drinking.
Absolutely. They resist initially.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. What shifts it for them? Like how, because that comes up a lot, I think, even with me, like it's like, well, have you experienced this? Or like from young ladies too, to be like, have you done this or have you experienced this before you can advise me? Right.
So I'll give you an example. So when I was in grad school, I was doing a placement. I was going to start a placement at a substance abuse facility.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my, I just said, I know how this is going to go. People are going to say, have you ever used? And I'm be like, no, you don't know what I'm talking about.
It's a legitimate question. Yes. Yeah.
And that's what I anticipated happening, right? And it happened like maybe my second day there. And I was just honest, no.
Yeah.
But what really helped them to connect to me was the consistency. I was there to support them, regardless of if I've been there or not. You know, I'm not judging you. I'm going to help you. Whatever you need, you tell me. You know, so that's the approach that I take with young people. It's like I was never carrying a gun and doing some of these things that, you know, some of our guys are doing. To me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So how can I be helpful to you now? Like, what do you need from me? Oh, the system is this way. The system is this way. Let me help you understand this is how the system is, and this is how you navigate it, you know? And because of your background, you may have some limitations, but we can overcome this, right? Here's some things that we can do. And it's going to be consistent, right? And we use this term in Chicago, relentless engagement. Like we're just like on it.
On it, yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And we're going to leave the door open. Of course, some people are going to be like, man, I don't want to mess with you, right?
Right.
I'm trying not to curse on your show.
You can curse.
I'm
It's a
trying
brave
not to
space.
mess with you. Okay, good. I love to curse.
Go ahead.
But, you know, once they realize that, you know, you're not on that judging thing,
Yeah.
right? Which is a big barrier.
It is.
Right.
It's huge.
It's one of the biggest.
It's huge.
Then they're going to eventually like loosen up a little bit.
I think too, and I asked that question because it's something that comes up a lot, like for me, especially too, because in this field, I encounter a lot more men, like young men, young survivors. So it's like the twofold, like you haven't really experienced what I've experienced and you're a woman. So it's like, what do you have to say to me, right? And I always try to figure out how to best navigate that. I think one of the tools I use is validation, right?
Yes.
So just validating, like, obviously I'm not a man, but validating like who do you want to be as a man or even as a young man, or who do you want to evolve to be? So asking questions that can help validate a person for who they are, not because we have this shared experience.
Right.
So is that a tool that you use,
Absolutely.
like validating?
The validation is important.
How do you validate young men? Give me some tips so I can take what you say and then I can apply it in these sessions.
I mean, I think we have to, when they give you some specific things, and sometimes they tell us things. Like if you really listen,
yes,
they will give you specifics. And, I try to acknowledge it in some way, whether I say it verbally or sometimes I don't say it, but I acknowledge it in some other way, like later on, like a week later, I may send them something, some note or something acknowledging what they told me, or some post, some funny post or something that acknowledges that, and they see that you're paying attention.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good.
Because they want to realize, they want to know that, you are willing to go there with them. It's like, no matter what background you come from, are you willing to acknowledge where I'm at? Meet me, when we talk about meet people where they are, like literally like meeting them where they are and getting them what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the validation, it's the attention.
The consistency. Like that, to me, the consistency is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Like you just got to be available.
Right. And it's a relationship.
Yeah, all of this adds to the relationship.
Yeah, all of it does. And the patience. Like it's the secret sauce, right? You have to have a little bit of all of those things. And it's also the timing too, because I have a lot of clients that may start that initial session, drop out for a few months and come back. And I'm like, okay, maybe it was something I said that made at least the space for them to feel like they can come back. Has that been part of your experience where people kind of drop in, drop out, come back?
People drop in and drop out, and sometimes we take it personal, and it has nothing to do with us. It's like some other thing that's happening in their lives. So I'll give you an example. So we had a participant in one of our programs that he would just drop out for like weeks at a time. And we found out later that it was because his mother would go through certain episodes and he had to, do more for the family, more for his siblings. It had nothing to do with our program.
Right.
But that's the way we took it initially, so we do have to go deeper and see like what's really happening here, before we just write this person off. And a lot of programs will do that. Oh, they haven't showed up for 3 weeks. Oh, we're going to cut them out the program. That's when we need them most. That's when we need to be like going, trying to find them and really connecting with, see what's happening. And doing home visits if we can. Like home visits tell so much.
Yep.
Yes,
they do. They do.
Right. You're just like, it makes so much sense now.
Everything comes together. And it helps you not to judge.
You're
it helps you not to judge. Because it's like I understand more without you even having to say. Because not everybody wants to say. And I think we have to be respectful of people, especially young people. Like they may not want to tell us.
Right.
But we should still be able to find ways to be helpful. Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
And they don't know sometimes how to even articulate it because they don't think you'll even believe them, And most of us won't believe them until we see it.
Yes, which is an adult problem, right?
Exactly.
Right. So that kind of brings up another question for me. You mentioned that sometimes when clients or participants like drop off for a while, we can take it personally. Yeah. So, and I've found that sometimes taking it personally has a lot more to do with like whatever else is going on in my life, right? And it's just associated with whatever. How do you navigate that? Like, how do you keep a cool head? Like, how do you, call that participant back if you have things going on in your personal life?
Well, I have to step back sometimes. That's just a thing where, I had a participant who, I helped him get a job. And I said, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to pick you up every morning, and take you to the job until you get your first paycheck. First morning I go, doesn't answer the door, see him later that day and say, hey, what happened? Oh, man, my fault. I fell asleep. I couldn't wake up. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, that type of thing. The next day, went back again and to pick him up again. Same thing happened, And I'm thinking, am I a roadblock here? Like, am I, you know what I mean? It's like you question yourself.
For sure.
I had one of my staff, we were at a dinner one night and she says how she's upset with one of her participants. This is like years later in a different program. And she says, she got him a job and he stopped going,
Yeah.
Same thing that I was going through. So at that moment, this is like 2008, it hit me that we're not going deep enough. Because we don't understand, like, what are some of the things that they're dealing with that are really the roadblocks.
Right.
Whether it's, their confidence, whether it's, they don't feel like they're at a certain level. If we don't know these things, the trauma that they've experienced, right? If we don't know some of these things, then we're just going to be like, oh, he's a knucklehead, just didn't want to go work.
Right. We'll keep it at the most base explanation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to go deeper.
Yeah.
Because now we understand, man, there's a whole generational thing happening here, and this is how it manifests with this person, right? Now we have to step our game up to do more, and not just for that individual, but for their networks.
Yeah.
We got to be thinking about their family networks and their social networks. Two main influencers. They spend most time with their family and their friends.
Yes.
So the couple hours they're spending with my program a month or a week is going to get overshadowed by the hours and hours each day that they're spending with their family, who, is projecting their challenges onto them, right, and their behaviors, right? So it's an uphill battle. And if we're not acknowledging that and really approaching it from that standpoint, we're not going to see the traction that we want to see with our young people.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's helpful even just to say all these things out loud, because when you're in it, like, you're just in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're trying to figure it out. Like, should I reach out this time? Should I do the whole relentless approach? Because there's a balance, because it sounds like, you saying I'll pick you up every day for 2 weeks. That's part of that relentless approach, which works. Right. But what do you do when it doesn't work? Or when it doesn't work for this person versus that person? I think that has been a challenge, like finding a balance. And I like your point, too, about just reflecting on yourself. Right. Like, am I being a roadblock? Or like, maybe it's just not the right time.
Right. So your question about, other things that we may have going on, that plays a big role.
Yeah.
So we're not able to compartmentalize like some of the things that we have going on. And we all have stuff going on. Relationship issues, financial issues, all these things that can spill over and impact how we work with, a participant and their families. So we have to be very intentional about just being able to check in, with ourselves about it. Like, where am I really at? But it's not something that just normally happens. It has to be something that's done with intention. And some people have to be taught how to do it. So there's a lot of stuff about like meditation, like some people are able to do that through meditation. Some people have like wellness check-ins that they do with, a clinician or somebody on the team that they're able to do. Those things are helpful, but most programs don't have any kind of structure around something like this. So you're just fending for yourself with, the BS that you're dealing with at the job because you and your coworkers don't get along, or your supervisor is toxic, or all these things. Right? Just contribute to like how we provide services to this person who's been victimized, right? And we are basically charged with helping them change their trajectory. It's not going to happen.
It's not. I mean, you say it simply, but yes, it's not going to happen.
It's not, right. And like you said, most of us are in the midst of it and unable to understand that we're not helping because we're not addressing those things. So like, we don't think those things are important. It's like training is so important.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that programs probably spend last.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we got some money left in training. Let's just do this. We should have been training from the beginning.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
You putting people out there that have no clue what they're doing, and it's like, oh, we hired them based on the fact that they said they got a bunch of nieces and nephews. Like, what are we doing?
Or even hiring based on lived experience, which of course is core to this field, but that should also be matched with some support for the front line.
Support, but we need certain skill sets.
Skill sets, yeah. Skills,
because just because you return home doesn't mean that you can
ready.
do this work.
Yeah.
Just because you have a master's degree don't mean you can do this work.
Right.
There's certain skill sets that we need, and sometimes we're just so desperate to get the program going quickly, get the program up and going, that we will just hire bodies.
Yeah.
We're not very thoughtful about it because we got to hurry up and get going. I'm like, you know what? We need to take our time. That's my philosophy 30 years later.
30, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I've been in this field for 30 years. 30 years later, this is how I am. Like, we're going to take our time and get who we need.
Yeah.
Because we're going to hire the wrong people and the program's going to be trash moving forward. And it's going to take you years to like backtrack and get it right.
Right. Because then you get into a habit of doing it the wrong way.
You get into the habit and then the community's done with you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. What specific skills do you think are important? Let's just start with like those who are on the front lines, those who are going out, canvassing in the neighborhoods. Like, what skills do you think are important?
Listeners. It sounds super basic, but listeners. Like, I've had, workers who, they preach too much. Oh, you should do this. You should do this. Just as you mentioned earlier, they see the things that if you only change this, that's what they focus on. You need to just do this. I don't want to hear that.
Right.
Like, you lost me.
Right.
Because everybody else is telling me the same approach. I don't want to hear that from you either.
Right.
So listening is super important. I mean, empathy, but being available, all those things are critical. But they have to have the ability to build relationships and to navigate communities, and understand like what's happening. I mean, now you're getting into like the interruption side of things. Like, you need to like know who's who in a community. And some people have those skills, but they just don't have the other things. And I think we have to stop settling for just certain pieces of it. And we need to think more comprehensively, like, what do we need?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you teach that? Like, how do you actually teach? Is it in a group setting? Is it one-on-one? Is it a combination? Like, how are you teaching?
I mean, it's a combination. I mean,
Yeah.
You have to really think about what each individual person needs. Like, you just can't just put everybody in a training class and then hope everybody's going to get it, because people learn differently. There are different stages of comprehension, right? So we have to do follow-up and, help us understand where people are, what they got, what they didn't get, right? Because some, organizations, it's like, oh, you went through the training, you should be good to go.
Yeah.
Right? And why are you still doing this when you got trained on it? Or maybe they didn't understand it.
You think that's a leadership issue too?
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
Having the wrong leadership that doesn't understand how fundamental the training is for the front line.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the leadership needs to be in the training themselves. And, oftentimes they don't want to be in it. It's like, oh, I've been in this work for a long time. I've been trained already. We need the refreshers. All of us need the refreshers. This stuff is like so fluid. How we deal with trauma, how people are impacted by it, like how communities deal with violence. We need to be up to date.
Yeah. Yeah. Even the fact that we're talking about trauma, right? And that people are being more forward coming with saying, I've experienced trauma. I know I'm not where I need to be. I think that's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
I think it's a big deal.
We've moved, ahead from we were 30 years ago for sure. Nobody was talking about it at that time. And it was
like not at all.
Not at all. And everything was a criminal justice issue, But now we understand that, mental health is like a big piece that's been missing, so.
Even before the field was focusing more on trauma-informed care, like, did you have an eye to see that we should be supporting the front line? Like, they need their own, even if it's not therapy, but their own, like, self-care training? Like, was that ever a thought that you had earlier in your work?
Yeah, probably about 15 years ago, started focusing more on that, So I remember I was, doing some groups with an organization, and we were talking about, just trauma and, some challenges that people are faced with, and, just dealing with like nightmares and intrusion, and all these things, like the demise of relationships and all of this. And I was working with a team of interrupters at the time, and they were like raising their hands, like they're going through this. I'm going through that. I'm going through that. I'm going through that. And, there was nothing to support them. We just expect that somebody who is an interrupter is going to be, in the streets for most of their lives. Many of them were in prison for 10, 20 years. It's just another level of trauma. And now they're back out, and we expect them to do this work.
Yeah.
Effectively.
At that,
right.
yes.
And, compartmentalize all the stuff that they've been through. And even with the job, it's like reoccurring trauma is happening.
Vicarious trauma happening.
Daily, right? Because there's still shootings that they're responding to that, their loved ones are still being lost. Right. And their participants are getting killed.
Right.
So all of that combination, and we're just like, we expect them to function and do this work effectively. I had a worker who, he lost a participant. Another participant's brother got killed the same weekend, and it made me think about, because he was a mess, rightfully so, he was a mess. But we got into this conversation about bereavement, right? And the organization didn't have any bereavement policy for when you lose a participant. So it was like, oh, you lose an uncle or an aunt or a mother, your mother, clear, right? But with participants, there was no policy. So the conversation went like this, talking to the HR department, they were like, well, maybe he can use his PTO or use, FMLA. I'm like, what?
Why is that the first solution? Maybe it's just the easiest solution.
Right. It's like, because they created a separation between participants and family. Yeah. And for a lot of our workers, their participants are family.
Yes.
Like they've been working with them for a while. They're that invested with them. And it's like, if they lose them, it's like losing a family
member. Yeah, for sure.
So one, we have to acknowledge that. Like if we're doing this work like optimally, like we're going to be hitting that type of relationship between our workers and participants. I mean, that's really what we want, because we want to build trust. We want to build a relationship. These are the things that keep participants engaged, right? And on the path to do something more productive. But if we don't acknowledge the importance of things like that, then we're doing ourselves a disservice.
And also too, just speaking from as a healthcare provider, they train us wrong. Right? Because they train us to have so much separation, right, between like yourself and the client. And maybe that works in a lot of cases. Right. It does. In the CBI field, it absolutely does not, right? It just doesn't. That formula of, there's healthy ways to disconnect from your interactions with a client, but it's just different.
So there are healthy ways to keep the relationship, right?
Yeah.
But when those procedures were designed, they weren't for this type of work, to your point. So, I mean, you're not going to engage, certain guys on the street if you limit certain things.
Right.
And, it's like, you're robotic. Oh, I can't do this because of this is my job, blah, blah, blah. It's like most workers have thrown that stuff out the window so they can get close to them and build a true relationship.
Which is also more effective.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's not even that it's a shift in, what's considered like the standardized approach. It's like, no, like this is actually what's gonna reach this youth, this high risk youth. You need a different approach.
Right.
And I found just in working with young people that I have to be flexible, and I'm always changing, always growing, always learning, because there isn't just one approach that fits everyone. And to your point about training, it's like, how do you train people to be flexible, to kind of shift not only the front line, but also leaders, right? That it's your policy is your policy, but it may not work, right? Yes. So how do you factor that into your training approach?
I mean, I try to train on experience, things that I know that have worked, but also, things that I've learned from my workers. You know what I mean? So not necessarily things that I've done or approaches that I've, started using, but things that I've picked up along the way because that makes sense in that context, right? I'll give you another example. I had a worker who, I said, man, where you been? Where were you? He's like, oh, I took my participant's mom for a job interview. So initially I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, make it make sense, right? And the more I thought about it, totally makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if I said that to some programs, they'd be like, no, we ain't doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was so critical because if the mother gets a job, then that's going to create a different
Stability. Yeah.
Yes. You know what I mean? So sometimes like we get this from workers who are themselves, they bring a level of expertise, and they listen, right? And, we have to, as leaders who are, running programs or whatever, we have to be able to take that counsel from our staff and say, you know what, man, wow, this makes sense. I never thought about this, and not shut it down because we didn't come up with the idea. So that's being a good leader, is being able to welcome that and following their lead at times.
Do you find that you're more effective training those on the front line or leadership? Like, do you spend most of your time training the front line or training the leadership?
It's probably a mix for me.
Mix? Okay.
I think leadership, when we're talking about like CVI, like they don't really validate it as like a real field. Like a lot of people think of it, it's just X guys in the street playing basketball with guys in the street, right? Yeah. And it's so much more than that. This is a real field. And they just don't acknowledge it. So that's one of the main issues. So it's getting them to really look at it as something we've been trying to legitimize, is a challenge. And then you have, those who have been doing this work, boots on the ground, who feel like, I know this work, I could be doing the training, so I don't need to listen, right? But when I think about, athletes, like athletes are getting trained.
Right.
And if you're an athlete who doesn't want to get trained or coached, you may not be on the team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just part of what needs to happen, because you're going to learn something that you didn't know, or you look at it from a different side. So nobody's above getting coached or trained. So that's the philosophy that I come in with.
Yeah, I like that too, and it almost sounds like ongoing training, not just like
ongoing.
Not just like a one time.
Oh, you got your training 2 years ago. You good? No, it's like ongoing. We got to be doing booster sessions. Like we got to be training ongoing.
Yeah.
Again, all these things that people are dealing with. They're personal things. They got a flat tire in the morning. All these things, and it's like training helps you deal with all that. How you balance all this. Sharpen your skills, making sure that you're taking care of yourself. All these, it's like, it doesn't just happen for most folks.
Right. So I think it's really dope that you are trained as a social worker, right?
Social workers, what's up?
Right. I'm not a social worker.
I know.
But I value the shared knowledge, right? And especially in this field, I think it's really interesting how you said that you essentially wanted the knowledge base that came with social work.
Yeah.
So that you could apply it in the CVI field. So can you just tell me more about that?
So I decided to go to grad school. I was just like, you know what, man, I just need a degree. I just need a master's degree because I just want to be more relevant, and just, have more credibility. So I decided to go to the University of Chicago, and I'm like, I'm just going to do the admin track. I was like, there's no way I'm doing clinical. It's too much. It's too involved. I'm not doing clinical. So my first quarter in school, I actually had two African-American professors. One was teaching like a history of social work, and one was teaching like a clinical approach. That quarter, I was like, damn, I got to do clinical. Because it had nothing to do with me wanting to be a clinician per se, but it was about how can I have the best understanding of what people are dealing with, individuals and communities. And it's like, it's so relevant to the work that we're doing, trying to reduce violence. How do people think? How do people function? What are they dealing with, and how does it impact them, right? So I was like on this, just on this like rampage to like get everybody to be clinical. Be having all these conversations, like trying to convert people. We need to do clinical. I wasn't very successful. People were like, I'm not doing that. but it's one of the best things that I've ever done.
Wow.
You know, it just helped to open my eyes so much, and just be more understanding of how people, you know, react to certain things and the impact that it has. You know, I started a program, and we grew the program to over 100 people, you know, a violence intervention program. And the supervisor that I hired for the outreach team was at LCSW, because that was very intentional, because I wanted to incorporate some of those principles. Here's the thing, Dr. Jordan, you know, we will never have enough clinicians.
Right.
Like, I wish everybody could have their own clinician.
Yes.
It will never happen.
It'll never happen, yeah.
So there's got to be other people who are bringing those type of approaches and supports to individuals. I mean, our interrupters, our outreach workers, our case managers should be incorporating certain skills in their work that can support people. Certain clinical approaches that can support people, because we're not going to have a therapist for everyone.
Right.
You know, so there's things that we can do. And we've been trying to do a lot of those things, you know, now, just to get them. One is helping them as workers understand, you know, this whole field better, building their skills, making them more, you know, attractive as far as, you know, their skill sets and for opportunities and so forth. But many of them are like, I want to go back to school. I want to, you know, I want to be a social worker. I want to be a clinician or, you know, something, you know, so.
Yeah. So you were trained as a clinical social worker. Did you ever actually like provide therapy? Did you try it out?
In my internships, I did. So I did some placements where I did that. I love doing it.
Yeah.
And, you know, my people that I know are always trying to get some, I'm like, no, I don't do that. You know, no.
They want you to be their therapist?
Yes.
You seem like you would be a good one. Probably a great one.
I'm a good listener.
Okay.
And I think
which is key.
We have to listen. And it's like, I'm not going to judge you, you know, because I never want to be judged when I tell anybody anything. And, you know, I tell people about my experience going to therapy. You know, when we're in grad school, you know, our professors are like, you guys should be going to therapy, you know, and like, not because you need it, you know, but because just so you understand, you know, how it operates.
How it feels for the person, yeah.
And I tell my guy friends this especially, I say, you know what, you know, I'm one where I have a lot of friends and I have, you know, brothers and there's not one person that I could tell everything to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
There's some people I tell certain things to. You know, I might give, you know, one of my brothers some of this, you know, one of my friends some of this. Because the other things, I know they'll judge me on.
Yeah.
So I'm not even telling them that. But I went to see a therapist. I had this, like, Caucasian woman. And I was just telling her all kind of stuff. I was, like, really unloading, waiting for her to flinch and, like, her eyebrows raise or some reaction, you know? Never. Like, she didn't react in any way. She not like, oh my God, that's what you did?
Right.
None of that.
Right.
And then I always felt like she was on my side. She was asking me about how I was in that moment, you know? And I'm like, that's what we need. We need that outlet where we can unload all that shit that we have. And nobody's saying, why you do that?
Right. Which we get a lot of that, I think. Just
the minute I get that, I ain't coming back to you for nothing else.
Yeah.
I ain't telling you nothing else about me.
Yeah.
So we that's how we got to operate. So that's what I incorporate in just the way I manage, the way, you know, I operate with, you know, clients, cities, you know, different teams that we train. It's like I come from that lens where it's like I'm going to be a listener. People are really trying to do the best that they can do. Some people just haven't been exposed to certain things.
For sure.
And how can I help with that?
For sure. I've had to you know, as I'm learning and growing, I've had to come up with some one-liners, right, to kind of help myself out and help the person out. So I might say something like, you know, it's okay. And initially, you may lie to me. You may not want to tell me everything. Like, that's all right. Just know that I can only advise you on what you tell me. Yeah. And I found that to be really helpful because it builds trust. Because it's like, like, whatever you tell me, like, however it goes, I'm okay with it. Right. But the more you tell me or the more you share, the more effective like I can be
Absolutely.
in how I lead you. And that has been really helpful. I usually get a lot of laughs out of that. Like people lie to their therapists all the time. Right. But it would be good if you didn't. Right. But
I like it.
either way, I'm not judging you. Do you have like any one-liners to kind of open up? Because it takes a lot of work to open people up, right? And build
I
rapport.
can't think of any. I'm more of an on the fly type of guy, so something just comes to me in the moment. I might make some crack or something like that. But I like your approach.
Yeah. I had to practice that. Right. It takes, especially I think working with young men, right? It's like I think sometimes there could feel like pressure, like, I wonder if she's going to judge me or think of me as less than a man or like judge my manhood. And so I found it helpful initially to just put that out there, to speak the unspeakable or to say, there isn't much at this point that I haven't heard. So, you're free to say whatever you need to. Like, this is the place. Like, if you want to say something, like, this is the place, especially to, going back to our work with gun violence reduction, like, this is the place to talk about retaliation. Right? If someone has shot you, it makes sense that you want to retaliate. Like, why would I really judge that? You know what I mean?
Right.
But we could also, by talking about it, get you to a place where you might change your mind. And that could be a good thing too. So it's taking some time to learn how to have those conversations. But what are some things that you've learned over time that you just kind of routinely go back to keep you effective?
Well, I mean, right now what I'm doing is a lot of training with folks and just helping people understand like the CVI ecosystem. I'm helping, first of all, focusing a lot with like city administrations and just leadership in municipalities as far as the need for CVI, right? And it's not just something that is like a 1-year thing,
Right.
This has to be part of the infrastructure for decades. Like this field isn't going anywhere. Violence isn't going anywhere. I know people think that we're going to shut it down in a year and then it's like
not.
you can move on. No, it's not going anywhere. So I really stress just the importance of, helping them understand the need to like stick with it. It's like, it's a permanent field, like how we would look at like doctors or lawyers or police. Like those fields aren't going anywhere.
Right.
And, even if violence is reduced, they're not going to get rid of police.
Right.
If people weren't as sick as they usually are, they're not going to get rid of doctors, right? So we have to understand that this is a field that has to be acknowledged, one, has to be invested in and supported over the long term, So, people create these timelines. They want to get certain things done because of whatever administration, all these different things. I think what we're missing is the involvement of the community in this process, right? So, this may or may change, but the community wants this.
Right.
So the community we have to really highlight the community's ownership of this more because it shouldn't change because there is a change in administration.
Right.
It should still be around. So my work lately has been really about, getting them to understand the importance of CVI, and then making sure that the boots on the ground folks are working in an optimal way, right? That is a little bit more challenging because there's so many factors in that. As we talked about their backgrounds as far as like the things that they've experienced,
Right.
The trauma that they've experienced. These are things that, when you think about programs, personnel is one of the number one issues that you deal with is personnel.
For sure.
So the leadership, the management, these are all things that are neglected. So these are the things that when I'm working with a city or an organization, I'm really analyzing all those things to see like where are the gaps. The gaps are, this part with personnel, funding. Yes, people focus on that too much. Funding's important, but it's like there's things that we can be doing to address personnel, issues and just the infrastructure better, So I spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah. So tell me more about your organization. What's the name of it? How did you decide to start it? All of that.
So Trajectory Changing Solutions, TCS. I worked. So I'll give you a little bit of history. So I worked for Ceasefire in Chicago. So it really helped to start Ceasefire. I joined there in like 1998, and that turned into Cure Violence. And I left Cure Violence actually when I was in grad school and worked for another organization, started doing some consulting, and then I landed at a big organization called UCAN at the time. So I worked there for just about 8 years. When I left there, I went to the mayor's office in Chicago and started the OVP there under Mayor Lightfoot. So that was the first time they had an Office of Violence Prevention. We called it Office of Violence Reduction. And we started investing money into CVI, more boots on the ground, street outreach. So I left there in 2021, partly because I wanted to just have more of a national focus on my work. So I wanted to continue work with Chicago, but also to participate in some opportunities around the country. So I started TCS in 2021, and we work with cities. We help them, we train them. We help them develop plans. We're also, working with. We started doing some work in St. Lucia, so in the Caribbean. Also looking at some other Caribbean countries. Jamaica's, obviously where I'm from, so Jamaica is dear to me. But places that, are ready to do something. And it's very fulfilling for me. I mean, one of our principles that we're doing the best work of our lives. I love this work.
Yeah.
And if I didn't love it, I wouldn't do it. A lot of times people do work that they don't love, it just pays the bills or whatever. It's like, I really genuinely love this work. I'll work 12 to 14, 16 hours a day, working on some concept or building something, things that have come up over the last 30 years and maybe didn't get a chance to come to fruition, right?
Right.
And now it's like, oh, I remember that. Look, can we incorporate that in some way? So I'm having a good time. We believe in, clear communication, but one of our main principles is that we learn because we listen.
I like that. We learn because we listen.
Yeah.
That's nice. Because it kind of has the assumption that you can't learn if you don't listen, which...
You can't even hear somebody talking if you're talking.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that's what usually happens. But we need to listen more, And it's you said something earlier about when we're speaking out loud, right? It's like when you think about when you're in therapy and the therapist is asking you a question, you're saying some things out loud. It's like, did I just say that? You're like, and the therapist is like,
yeah, what you think about that?
There's your answer. And it's like, it hits you because you heard yourself say it, But that doesn't happen if we're busy talking all the time.
Right. Or if we keep our wisdom and our experiences kind of locked away in the one-on-ones, right? Which is why even just doing this podcast is important, especially in this field. It's like we really need to heal in community because I hear so many like rich experiences one-on-one, and I'm like, there are lots of people who could benefit from that, like your colleagues, your peers, the people you mentor, people who just deserve to hear about your experiences, right? What are some wins that you've experienced? Like, tell me pre-trajectory, changing solutions, and then since you got into your own company. Like, what are some wins?
I mean, there's so many wins.
Yeah.
It's like, I've been very fortunate, I believe my career has been pretty steady. There's been some highs and lows, but for the most part, it's been steady. And I think that's why I'm here so long. I mean, I think the longevity has been a win because it helps, with my credibility when, I'm, pursuing certain projects or in certain conversations, So, but it's really, I've just been fortunate to be in certain roles, I mean, I've done the work, that I've needed to do, but I believe that I've been blessed with some great opportunities, I like to challenge myself because I think that's how we really grow.
Yeah.
And when I was in grad school, and I was looking to do a placement, you know, and the two placements that I said I didn't want to do, one was with LGBTQ
Okay.
and one was with substance abuse.
Okay.
I was like, I didn't think those audiences would listen to me. And I didn't think I could be effective. Do you know both of my placements? One was LGBTQ and one was substance abuse.
So definitely challenging yourself.
And it just kind of worked out, you know, and I tell you what, we were working with, you know, LGBTQ runaway youth. Oh, man.
Yeah.
That opened up my eyes. This is 2006. And there was just so much I was ignorant about, you know. Them kids taught me so much.
Yeah.
And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, not just a placement, but experience. And then the other one was the substance abuse. It was like, I'm not doing that either. And I ended up doing that as well. But at some point, you're like, you know what? Let me just see how I am. I'm going to step out of my comfort zone. At the same time, I could have done a violence prevention placement because, you know, my advisors are like, hey, you already know it. I'm like, I already know it.
Yeah. Learn something new.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I pushed myself on it, and I never thought about substance abuse before, but it helped me so much. All of those things have like contributed so much to just my success in the field, you know, just understanding like just parts of community, you know, and how we can best support people. I mean, that's what it ends up like, understanding where people are.
Yeah.
What people go through. You know, it's like, you know, we have young people telling us that their parents kicked them out and they're sleeping on the train. They're sleeping in construction sites, you know, and they're carrying a gun so they don't get raped.
Right.
It's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the deeper you go, you're like, damn, like, we've been missing a lot of this stuff. You know, so it just opened up my eyes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's amazing too, because it does challenge us to step outside of like what we're comfortable with, like what experiences even that we may feel that we're comfortable with. I think too, and this is maybe more of like a question for you, but how, like when you're thinking about starting your own company, right, in the CVI field, you have lots of pre-experience. Like what are you trying to do differently? Like what did you say when I start PCS, I need to do this differently because, you know, what I've seen before isn't working.
Yeah.
Like, what was it for you?
So, I mean, I've learned a lot of what was missing from places I worked at before, right?
Yep.
So I told myself I'm going to try to be more comprehensive and more understanding, like where people are. When I was working at Cure Violence, Ceasefire at the time, I was the director of Ceasefire, and we got to a point where we lost a supervisor on one of the teams, you know? So I said, I volunteered to go and work as the supervisor of that team in the neighborhood because I just wanted to get that experience.
Yeah. Taught
me so much. It's totally different than when you're at the university, you know, and you're like boots on the ground. So to me, that was just like another experience where like we have to come out of our comfort zone so we can like get a better understanding. I lost the last part of your question.
Yeah, no, I was just asking, like, was there one thing that you said you wanted to do differently, which I think is...
So one, I wanted to just get more understanding as far as what it's like underground, you know. But with TCS, you know, Chicago is very different than other cities, you know. So my experience has been a lot with Chicago, you know, working in Chicago, working for the mayor in Chicago. And I always said when I was working for the city, I'm like, I know smaller cities don't have to deal with a lot of this mess, you know. But I think if Chicago is like the example of the most difficult, you know, which in some cases it is, I'll use that experience to work in a smaller community or, you know, a place where the challenges would be different, you know. So things are different, but still a lot of the same things, you know. But at the end of the day, what it boils down to is people, you know. So being able to understand where people are coming from, you know, there's people have just seen a lot of mess from the past. I mean, you know, you know, some of the challenges I've seen in communities in the South are some of the same things that we see in communities in Chicago. Groups ain't been talking they don't even know why they don't talk.
Right.
You know, like all these things is just the relationships are destroyed from something that happened 20 years ago and nobody knows why. And it's really impacting how the community, you know, what the community can get, you know, or how the community can be supported. So that's what I try to bring people back to is how can we better this community? Right? Let's I know we got our egos. I know we have, you know, things that we're trying to accomplish and we want to look good and all these things, but it's like, how can we best serve the community? So that's what I bring it back to.
Yeah.
Like no matter where I'm at.
Yeah.
And that seems to have an effect on people, but it has to be a consistent message. And you really have to create a movement in each of these areas that everybody's on board and they're advocating, you know, because the perception of, oh, this group is getting something that we're not getting, they're getting money, we're not getting money, all these things, those things get in the way. How can
they're distractions.
They're definitely distractions. And some of it is not even true sometimes.
Right.
You know, so how can we get people to focus on really what's the matter at hand here? It's like getting our communities to be safer, getting our Black boys, our young people, you know, to be safer and to be less violent. What can we do around that?
Yeah. Yeah. It speaks to motivation, which I've kind of heard themes of that throughout just everything that you shared, that just seeing, you know, losing friends early on, getting into this work, challenging yourself, getting clinical training, right? So it sounds like you've just been consistently motivated for a long time to work to reduce gun violence. Are there any new projects, ventures that you have coming up? I see your Peace Can't Wait hat.
Oh, yeah. Definitely the clothing line and just, you know, more branding about what we're doing. I mean, one thing that we're missing in this current age around like CVI, there's not a lot of messaging. You know, like...
That's a good point.
Early 90s, you know, in the 90s, you saw a lot of campaigns, you know, around, you know, put the guns down, like more so back then, anti-violence, Black on Black love, like all these things. But we don't really see that now. So there's some of it happening, but not at the level that it should be happening. Like if we're really trying to change behavior, you know, like we're trying to be on the level where people are wearing their seatbelts more now, or people aren't smoking as much, right? Like we got to get people, you know, seeing messages more and interacting with messages more if we want to see them reducing violence. And, you know, I'm not one to say that that's the thing that changes people. That's part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
That's part of it. You know, that's not the thing that made people wear their seatbelt. Also, you're getting tickets. Also, you know, you see people who are getting killed. You lost loved ones. All these things, right? I went to, you know, my daughter's 3-year-old checkup years ago. She's 27 now. And the doctor said, do you wear your seatbelt? And I lied and I said, sometimes. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt at all.
Yeah.
And she said, you're no good to her if you don't wear your seatbelt.
That's a message.
And that's the moment that I thought about somebody else, other side, you know, outside of me.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. So it's like, she's right. If I don't wear my seatbelt, if I'm hurt, I can't parent. I can't support my daughter. So I started wearing my seatbelt after that. It's crazy. And I had been in accidents where I got rear-ended, all these things without a seatbelt. I was in pain for weeks. That didn't do it.
Wow. That's a amazing example. Because essentially you're saying like it was the message, how it was delivered, when it was delivered, the context.
And who delivered it.
And who delivered it.
I'd never expected a doctor to say that to me, anything about my seatbelt.
Yeah. So it's the message.
So it's the message. We have to have multiple messengers that are giving these messages to our young people, to our communities, you know, to guys in the streets. It can't just be, you know, the CVI worker,
right?
You know, that they expect it from. It's got to be other people. So, you know, I talk a lot about COVID, you know, I talk about the fact that, you know, addressing COVID wasn't relegated to public health professionals or just medical staff.
Right.
Everybody was doing something.
Yeah.
Like every church was doing something. Philanthropy shifted and they were doing something. Street outreach was doing something about COVID. All these entities that you were like, why Why would they do it? But then in the midst of it, you're like, of course they should do it.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's an emergency.
Yes.
Everybody should be doing something.
All hands on deck.
All hands on deck.
Yeah. But why don't we feel that way when it comes to gun violence?
Hello.
Though? Like you say it with such ease, but it's like, why is gun violence and people getting shot in the street, like, why is that not an emergency?
Exactly. That's the point. It is an emergency. It costs so much money. It costs
so expensive.
$557 billion each year.
Every year.
But we only expect, in communities, law enforcement to do it. And if you got a street outreach program, them too.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody else is involved in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the advocacy that's needed. This is the movement that's needed in cities, is that everybody's saying, you know what, it's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do something about it, it's going to impact us all. And it has.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a strong enough message, though, to say gun violence is we know that, right? But do you think that's a strong enough message to like shift the public health focus for people who may still feel like, oh, CBI, it's just people coming home from prison and, like, is that enough?
I mean, it really depends on the community and the actors that are involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
So who's the ones that are like talking about it? Who is the ones that are advocating for it?
Or delivering the message, like you said.
Exactly. So in some places, I mean, like, in Chicago, I could tell you there's like police brass in Chicago who talk about this work.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some other places, police don't talk about it this way.
Right.
They talk about it as a competition.
Right.
In some cities, law enforcement has bought in. They're like, we need this program.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, in places like that, the mayor's on board. Like, you're going to see more traction and more results when you have that type of movement.
Yeah.
When you have hospitals being involved, right? Universities being involved,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just law enforcement.
Yeah. So what message Peace Can't Wait? Like, what's your ultimate, like, what legacy do you want to leave with the message, like, Peace Can't Wait?
I mean, it can't wait. Like, we're waiting for somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, somehow somebody's going to swoop in and just make our city safer somehow. It takes work, but we have to stay the course. Like, we can't, like, we've gone through programs where we've seen interruption in funding, like, all this, like, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, COVID, basically over 4 years, we spent $14 trillion.
Just a lot.
$14 trillion.
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point, when we started, nobody thought it was going to cost $14 trillion.
Of course not.
Right? They probably allocated $100 million. Who knows?
Yeah.
But as we progress, they're like, oh, we need to invest more money,
And actually, think about what you just said, too. The investments didn't stop until when?
Have they stopped? There's probably...
They've slowed.
Right.
They've slowed, right? But the major investments, right? Like maybe ARPA dollars.
Oh, ARPA is ending now.
Right. So I think the point is, too, it's like we gave all of this funding, right? Maybe investments have slowed, but what do you think was the reason behind? Was it because the numbers decreased? Like, was it more, more people weren't dying from it? Like what do you think it is? What's the stopping point?
Why is it slowed?
Yeah.
Well, I think they had put a, I mean, I think with COVID, we reversed it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the rates went down significantly.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say about the 14 trillion is that it costs what it cost.
Yes, exactly.
It costs what it costs. Like, no, but with violence, we're getting a cap on it. Oh,
yes.
Here's $500,000, make it work.
Yes. Because my point, too, is like, it wasn't 12. It didn't matter if it was 10, 12, 13, 14. If 14 is when we started seeing reductions, that's when the funding slowed. But to your point, in gun violence, it's like, we'll throw a little bit here.
Right.
And if it doesn't work, we're going to pull back money, which makes absolutely no sense. It's like, why are we pulling back funding when it hasn't reached the level, I don't know, that you think is appropriate? It's like, that's when we should be making more investments.
Right.
Right. And I think, of course, that's somewhat of a threat in this funding environment that we're in. But I really like your point about messaging. Right. Thinking about how we can use messages to kind of shift the narrative. and just building on that. There shouldn't be a cap. There shouldn't be a limit to what we will stop at or stop funding in order to stop seeing people dying.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this was a really rich conversation. I think I've learned a lot. Hopefully I've talked enough and I've said enough, but are there any questions? Any questions? So it could really be a brave space. Any questions you have? Yeah, for me.
I mean, I can sense, your passion, for this work, so I really admire that. And I love the fact that you're doing this podcast, as a way to just expose more people and pull more people in. I think that's what we need, is more conversations that are not the surface conversations. Yeah. We have enough of that.
Yep.
But we need to go deeper in this. Like what are we really doing here? And, I love to look at the gaps. I come to this work thinking about gaps. I think about worst case scenarios.
Yes.
And operating that way. What's the worst case scenario that can happen here, right? We're going to lose people. It's like, how can we work to address it? So when I go into cities, I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot of challenges, and, we really have to, have an impact. Yeah. Here's the thing. People got to see things. There's some steps that are happening, some successes that are happening, right? So we've been working in Chattanooga for the last, I've been there for the last 2 years, TCS. We started a program there basically like a year ago. Hired a team of, CVI workers. They've locked into a zone there. They haven't had a homicide in this zone since May 1st.
Wow.
Right? So that's 226 days. So there's 226 that we haven't had a homicide there, right? They're doing good work. Yep. It's like people want them to, come over here now. No, we ain't coming over there.
Yeah.
We locked in here because this is what the resources have. For us to come over there, we need to grow the team so we can do more areas. But let's stay focused on this. Let's shut this down, right? And then we can go from there. But there are successes that are happening. Now we just have to, again, create this movement, more advocacy, getting more people on board, more voices, and we're able to grow the initiative.
Yeah. I like that point. We need to stay here and then grow the team to build it out. Because
exactly.
Yeah, that is often the request. It's well, we don't have enough personnel or enough staff to meet the need. But it's we have to grow it. Right? We can't just uproot what's working here. We have to grow it.
We're responding to everything that's moving all over the place. You will never address it.
Yeah. So, I certainly appreciate your time on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So this is the Brave Space podcast. We meet, we process, we heal in community.